And it's great, because then you take that and you hammer out your sermon really quickly, and then you have the whole week to do other ministerial activities. And it is productive, and if you'll pardon me for sounding like a kid, it is awesome. And sometimes you get that message from the Spirit and you immediately ignore it. And you try and go off in a different direction. And you spend most of the week failing to go in that direction. And then inevitably you give in and do what you should have known you were going to do in the first place. And the latter of those was my experience this week. You ever heard the expression, a PK? Yeah. A pastor's kid or a preacher's kid. I don't know why PKs get this special acronym, and I apologize to Tavin for having given it to him now for the rest of his life. Most of you know that I was not, or for that matter, am not, a PK. I'm an SK. Church secretary's kid. It's nowhere near as well known. In fact, I think I'm the only person who uses that acronym. But sometimes it can be a similar experience. And a special experience going to church as a child. I remember that I would get to hear and see church office talk 6 or 7 days a week. I'd be in the office before school during the week, waiting for school to start, and I'd be in the office after school once it was done. I got to see and hear and experience church politics, at the dinner table, pretty much every day of my life. And truth be known, when I go back to visit the folks, and Sarah can attest, she's nodding, it is still probably the predominant, if not the entire conversation, it will come up at some point. I had a very, relatively speaking, unfiltered access to the pastors of our congregation, at times much to the chagrin of my mother, who felt that it was very much too informal. They were almost like uncles, I think is how I would express it. As a kid, from all of that, I came to one conclusion: I would never, ever, ever be a pastor. You have heard it was said, you shall not murder, but I say to you, if you are angry with someone, you shall be liable to judgment. And if you insult someone, you will be liable to counsel. And if you say, you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or your sister has something against you, leave your gift and go. First be reconciled to your brother or your sister, and then offer your gift. Do you know why I didn't want to be a pastor when I was a kid? There are many reasons. There were the hours. I'll confess I was a kid. There was the pay. There were the expectations of the role. That was a big one. There was a sense that I would never be good enough to be one. Although I must confess that my mother-in-law, who's also a pastor, as you know, out in Tacoma, she said one of the greatest things to me right before I entered seminary. I was speaking with her and I said, Mary, I just don't know that I'm good enough for this. And without missing a beat, or without dropping a beat, or missing the moment, she looked at me and she said, oh, you're not. You never will be. That's not the point. Like, oh, wise mother-in-law. If you ever hear this recording, Mary, I just called you wise. All of those were reasons, but there was at least one more. I knew that as a pastor, I would inevitably make some people upset. I knew that people would get upset with the church, they would get upset with God, and they would get upset with me based on something that I said, or something that I did, or something that I didn't say, or something that I didn't do. I knew that I would let people down, because I'm human. And I knew that some people, if I was a pastor, because I had seen this, some people would get involved with the congregation just because I was there, and I knew that some people would leave just because I was there. And I didn't like either of those options. But eventually I gave in and listened to this call. The side note, a very good friend of mine, who's a pastor in Ohio, once told me, if you have been doing this job for more than a year and you have not offended anyone, you are not doing the job correctly. I thought that was interesting. As Paul says, the gospel is a scandal and is contrary to human reason. So maybe there's something to be said for that. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or your sister has something against you, leave your gift and go. First be reconciled to them, and then offer your gift. Do you notice anything interesting in that sentence? And by interesting, I actually mean annoying. If they have something against you, it's not the other way around. That's annoying, isn't it? I mean, if they have something against you, shouldn't they come around first? If they have a problem with you, shouldn't they be the one to go to you and say, I'm sorry, or let's talk, or whatever is appropriate? It doesn't seem fair. It's almost like Christ expects us to rise above our humanness and act like children of God. It's almost like he expects us to be peacemakers, like he was talking about last week. Oh, right. Yeah, I guess that's part of it. I am aware, to be brutally candid, that realistically, a few folk have left since I arrived a year and a half ago. This is not shocking. One of the few places out there that does research into church life, the Alban Institute, has shown that time and time again, when a new pastor arrives, at least 10% or more of a congregation will oftentimes leave within the next few years. For what it's worth, we're way below that. I know the who's and I know many of the whys. But I feel moved to let you know, for what it is worth, that in those few times that has happened, I have tried to the best of my ability to be a peacemaker, to reach out, to visit and or call and or send a letter or postcard. Has not been comfortable, and maybe nothing will or has even come of it, but I've done it, not because I've wanted to, because I'm human, but because I've known it's the right thing to do. So why am I sharing this with you today? It's not because this is a big problem for us. It's really not. Our congregation is growing. If you look at our numerical worship attendance, we are growing. I would argue if you look at our spiritual livelihood, we are growing. If you look at our impact and our presence in the community, we are growing. We are a healthy, growing congregation. At our last council meeting this past week on Thursday, we even discussed that, believe it or not, for the month of January, we pretty much hit our budget expectations, which means we're growing. We are healthy. We're moving in a positive direction. And I'm not bringing this up because it's a problem. And I'm not bringing it up because it's been an issue that's on my mind lately. Because, to be honest, it hasn't been. To be honest, I haven't really thought about it until this past week when I was reading this gospel reading. Have you seen any of these pictures from what's been going on in Egypt lately? I don't know how any of you feel about the revolution going on over there. And honestly, that's not where I'm going with this. I don't know what will become of the revolution over there. And honestly, that's not where I'm going with this. But I did see some pictures this past week that were striking. And maybe some of you did too. It was pictures of Muslims and Christians protecting each other as they worshipped in the midst of this. Of a group of Coptic Christians having Mass, surrounded by Muslims, not in a threatening way, but ensuring that they weren't interrupted. There were pictures of Muslims as they bowed and prayed to Mecca, surrounded by Christians, not in a threatening way, but to ensure that nothing would interrupt them. That's striking. I don't know what will come out of that. I don't know if anything will come out of that. But what a beautiful image of hope in a place that, let's face it, we often feel is hopeless. There are people who were once valued and active members of this community of faith, who frankly we don't see here anymore. Sometimes for big reasons, sometimes for small reasons, for reasons of the past, for reasons of the present. People who walked away well before I ever interviewed, let alone before I was actually here. I'm naming an elephant in the room. Is everyone noticing this? If the Egyptian Christians and Muslims could join together, even for a moment, maybe there's hope for us. Maybe there is hope for reconciliation with some of those folk. Have we all set down our offering and gone to seek reconciliation? I don't know. Can we honestly tell ourselves that we have attempted to make right in those cases? Whether or not we think it's our position or place to do so, whether or not we think something is, quote, our fault, I don't know. I hope so. It is entirely possible and maybe even likely that nothing would come of such an action. But we have to try before we know that. Because if we are truly going to be people of God, if we are truly going to be disciples of Christ, then like it or not, we have to act like them. Amen.